everybody. Today I'm going to talk about something I've been seeing a lot, and I find myself joining in a bit of speculation, and I'm sure you have too. And in the astrology world, especially when you're dealing with mundane astrology, it often feels like we're sort of anchoring ourselves into the possibility and wonder, in a sense, of how things are going to unfold during these unprecedented times. One of those times that is coming upon us very quickly is the idea that a planetary conjunction known as Barbault's basket is going to spark what many are calling a transformation of society, what Barbault himself also talked about as a turning point for humanity. I feel pretty compelled to talk about Barbault's basket in some ways because it feels like a cycle repeating itself. And as someone who likes to look towards the future and likes to anticipate things, likely from a place of control and wanting to know where I'm going to end up and where I'm going, I can see the lure of how a point in time signals a radical change in this world, which is complicated and often chaotic feeling. I often go back to where we come from whenever I sort of think about mundane astrology. I like to think about the cycles, and I feel like that's pretty much what astrology is, right? Looking into the cycles, looking into where they've happened before. And I'm not an astrologer, but I feel that Barbault's basket feels very reminiscent of ways in which we've tried to anticipate and control what the future would bring and how that future would save us. How an event outside of our control, yet within our control, would save us. And when I say out of our control, the feeling that I'm getting from many across the world that are talking about Barbault's basket is that it's an event that's out of our control, an outside force, a flashpoint, or a trigger point or seed point, or however you want to describe it. It's something that we're not necessarily responsible for. And it feels very reminiscent of Y2K in some ways and the Mayan calendar. And I lived through both of those events, and the feeling of that those events still has that, you're kind of just holding your breath, right? And waiting to exhale. And where are you on the exhale? Where are we past this point? What I think and what I feel is probably a much different opinion than other people currently speaking to this. And I don't wish to be a counterpoint to those voices necessarily. I just feel it's the cycles that we already lived. And it's good to remember where we've come from. When I think about turning points in our time, and I'm speaking to myself, okay, in my memory, my lived experiences, I can't say that I ever really knew I was living through something that was a turning point. I lived through many events. I witnessed things that were scary and definitely life-altering, but I don't think I ever knew that they were those things in the moment. And like sort of going back to Y2K and the Mayan calendar, like those events came and went. Nothing happened in the event itself. But if we look back to the year 2000, what happened in 2001? A major shift in our lives and our society happened in 2001. And what happened in 2012? Major shifts were happening in 2012. But if you were living in that moment, you weren't adding up each day's events into a big picture. You were sort of just living. And so when I think about anticipated events like Barbault's basket, I think very much about those things. Are we going to recognize the events when we're living them? Or will it take time and a bit of reflection to see them for what they are? One example that I felt recently was sort of just chatting with a friend about where we are as a country and America and how we really feel the ground shifting underneath us and the change is constant, right? But the friend said to me that maybe it'll take 10 more years or 12 more years, but eventually we'll realize 2008 was the beginning of the end. And I found myself thinking, I never would have thought that, but yeah, I can see that being true. Having lived through 2008 as a college student and seeing how the people around me were starting to really talk about things that weren't necessarily good about our society, ways in which we felt disenfranchised and hungry for something different. We held ourselves to a different standard maybe than everyone else because we felt a sort of electricity that change was inevitable. And recognizing the problem does kind of give you that. It makes you think, hey, I see things for what they are, so I can be the solution. And feeling that and living that in 2008, I can say, yes, that was a turning point for me anyway. And now looking back, did I think it in 2008? No. I was living in 2008. I wasn't thinking this is the beginning of the end. So what I feel that draws back to is we're not going to necessarily recognize the event, but I feel that we will have the opportunity to witness transformation. So let's think logically then about Barbault's basket and what's being predicted. And I've heard calls of alien contact, escalation of war, public figures dying, all sorts of different scenarios in which this will be a transformation point. Let's just imagine that happened right now. And you were living one of those scenarios. What in your mind would shift? What would your mind shift away from? And what would it shift to instead? And could it be that your ability to already recognize how your life would change would mean that the flashpoint or star seed or whatever you want to call it is happening already? What are the voices that you're trusting right now? And how are those voices motivated? Is it different than your motivation? And what is your voice saying? I feel like these are important things to think about, because when next week comes, we're going to want to experience that. You're going to want to experience the change, the transformation. But what I feel is happening is that transformation is going to begin and end in us. Because when you really stop and you zoom back out, we are still just a ball of cells and atoms existing on a rock in space. And until we leave this rock in space, this is what will be. And this is the senses that we'll be able to explore. So while we're here, doesn't it make sense that the transformation begins and ends in us? And how does that feel? How does that feel to accept that the transformation that you're holding your breath for and that we're anticipating is us? I recognize a lot of the things driving us right now is a need for control, to control the narrative, control our destiny. And often I find myself more and more relinquishing control and accepting that the path is imperfect because I am imperfect. Could it be our desire then for this event is just another way of controlling how this all unfolds for us in a way that sort of relinquishes us from the responsibility of accepting our imperfect paths and our imperfect bodies and our imperfect minds? Could it be that we just continue on in the same ways, in the same mind, thinking things will change? Like making sense of the things that won't make sense, or pushing a story, pushing a narrative that has really no end. I don't know if anyone works in handicraft. I think about a ball of yarn. And if you've ever started a crochet or knitting project, you've experienced how things can go really wrong and how that hat, after a few errors, will never be a hat. It does feel like we're pushing on to a narrative that can never be, an ideal that will never manifest. But at the same time, I feel as long as we are existing in these bodies on this rock in space, there's the potential to experience this in a positive way, in which we look out into the world, into the natural world, into what is, and believe in our hearts that this is the transformation. Seeing it, living with it, knowing the value and knowing the true cost of not seeing it and not knowing it. I do believe that is part of the story. So I really wish to leave us with a sense of hope, because the power is really here already. The moment is here. The point is here. And all we have is now. So when you really reflect on what Barbault's basket will bring, I do think it will bring a very positive change, because we are going to keep recognizing where the power lies, and it is within us. We are the seed point. We are the transformation, and it's happening inside of us. Any external events that happen, anything that catches our attention and sucks us in, only brings us further from the transformation that's meant to happen inside of us. And I do believe that's really where the magic will lie. That's the whole game. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.